Hi, welcome to our discussion today for Rich in Color. We are discussing Stamped, and it's the specific version for young adults. It's Stamped Racism, Antiracism, and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. This is a remix of the original book by Ibram X. Kendi, Stamped from the Beginning. And I'm Crystal. I am a teacher librarian at an elementary school, and I'm happy to be here today.
Next. Oh, I'll go. I'm Kate Imani Tennyson, and I am an 8th grade middle school teacher and really excited to discuss this book with you today.
And I'm Audrey. I am one of the other bloggers at Rich in Color, and I am not a teacher.
But we love you.
Thank you.
So I'm in a book club here in town, and what we always start with is the cover. And so what did you think of it? This Jason Reynolds has called this Stamped Junior, and it has a very similar cover to the original, but there are some differences that I noticed. One of the first things I noticed was that the head is angled a little bit differently. And I was wondering, I don't know, but I thought perhaps it was to show more like a courage and hope or something like that. And then too, that the colors are just bolder in a way because they contrast more. But I was just wondering what else you might have noticed.
I noticed the colors of the American flag. So it looked very flaggy, very American. And I see it as, looking at America was this promise, this idea, and we have yet to live up with it. But like you said, the head, I didn't even notice the difference in the head, that the head was up. So it's like we're fighting for that promise and looking towards that promise. And then, like it's for kids, or I don't want to just say kids, but for young people. And young people are the promise, of a better future. And so instead of looking down, I think kids would internalize it as like a sorrowful thing. But if they're looking up, they internalize it as hopeful for change. That's what I thought.
Yeah, I really like those ideas. I did, like Kamani, notice the colors right away, the red, white, and blue, and then the black behind it. But I hadn't noticed the silhouette either, but I really like that idea that, the young people are the future and the hope, and that they can take the ideas within this book and keep pushing forward.
Okay. And now my first experience with Stamped was as an audiobook. Teachers can get audiobooks through Libro FM for free, and that was one of the free books for the advanced listening copy. And Jason Reynolds reading it just is really amazing because his the way he says things, the delivery of his jokes, or even, you can hear the irony in his voice and things like that. It's just really amazing. And I thought that for young people who aren't a big fan of reading physical books, this is really going to be very helpful to get them hooked. What other things did you all notice that might appeal to young people?
So I didn't listen to the audiobook, but I did listen to a sample of it. And I agree with you. I really enjoyed how Reynolds delivered it. One of the things I really enjoyed in the prose is very conversational style. It felt like, even though I wasn't listening to someone to talk to me, I was still listening to him talk to me. So part of that, one of the things I really enjoyed was the moments where he'd say, hey, remember this idea? It's actually this old idea, but just with a new packaging, a new spin. And that was really helpful to me to keep track of the thread of things changing, but still not changing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yes. I agree with it. With you. I love that part of it because it gave it a storytelling feel. So this not history book came alive that way. Because think about how we learn through storytelling, parables, and all the good kind of stuff with repetition. We remember it better, and kids remember it better, you know, mnemonic devices and all that good kind of stuff. So to have that, hey, remember, like, oh yeah, and the way he kind of used similar words to repeat as well. So I definitely agree with you on that. And I also I liked his conversational style. I didn't listen to the audiobook either, but I know when I teach it, I am, because I do, having heard Jason speak, just the way he speaks, you know, you're very engaged in his tones, and, you know, like his use, like you said, you could hear the irony in his voice, Crystal. So I think the book, I could hear his voice as I was reading, but that's because I've heard him speak before. But for students who might not, listening to the audiobook will definitely bring it home. It's like, you know, you're sitting with like your uncle or somebody like who's like, okay, let me tell you a story about, and you know, we've all had those. So, you know, come over here, sit on my lap, let me tell you something. That's what it felt like, which I think the kids were really, really grabbed to.
I totally agree. And he had this huge task of, one, filtering down a ton of information from that original book, but so much of that information was like really harsh realities, both of our past and our present. And he had to do that in a way that wasn't going to overwhelm young people. I mean, we want to be truthful, but we don't want to completely overwhelm them and make them just feel like nothing's ever going to be right. So I really, really appreciated his use of the pauses. Sometimes he would just remind us to breathe, and even changing the font just to switch up all that we're looking at. And of course, his humor. It's really hard to balance that heaviness with in a way that's going to keep people engaged. Mm-hmm. What did y'all think about that? Or were there?
I really liked the reminders to breathe or pause, because I found myself when I hit those points, I'm like, yeah, I am kind of upset, or I am kind of angry, or I'm, you know, just feeling very negative about these things, because it's just awful the way people have, you know, used racism to shape the world and shape society. And his moments where he said, okay, stop, breathe, think about this. I felt a very a great way to deal or process that information without being overwhelmed.
When you were talking, it brought up the chapter 6, the timeout chapter.
Oh yeah,
where it was just quick recap, let's pause, and then time in. And I wrote boom.
Exactly.
You know, and it was just 4 lines, you know. So I like that he broke it up sometimes that way. And then he also used poetic structure, which allowed those pauses, those breaths to come through, because you had to stop and breathe the words. And so I really appreciated, and that's what made it easy to read as well, was let's hold up, take a moment. Mm-hmm. And you know, I also enjoyed his little sides. Those really cracked me up. You know, he'd be like, really? And come on now. And I was just like, that's what happens in a conversation. You know, you're telling the story, so I'll be like, what? No, you know, just the banter back and forth. And I can't wait to listen to that, because I think it'll be really interesting and funny.
Yeah, definitely. I highly recommend the audio. Now, in the beginning, he explains that the book contains history, but it's not a history book. It's about the present, like how we got from there to here. And unfortunately, I recognized so many things from the past that I see actually on the news daily and weekly. And I know I definitely noticed that the phrase law and order, which I've heard quite frequently in my life, is certainly not a new one. So we see, you know, a lot of things like that when they first started, or the first few times it's noted that people are saying or doing these things. So it's about the progress and persistence of racism. And but what I loved about this book and with the original book is that there's that showing that yes, racism has been progressing, but anti-racism has also been progressing, that there have been anti-racist folks working all through those years too. And that enslaved folks, like he used the example that enslaved folks were freeing themselves. You know, Lincoln put out the Emancipation Proclamation, but that didn't get them free. They had to get to a place to become free. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he pointed out that people weren't just sitting there waiting to be rescued. So that was, you know, that anti-racist folks have been working, but Black folks have been also working to fight this. And I noticed I grew up in the Reagan era, and I had not really fully understood what was going on with those racist policies in terms like crack babies. Mm-hmm. But he writes, well, when that was going on, Black people, as always, fought back. So there's this celebration of persistence, and also that challenge that we join that. And I think that's going to be really helpful for young people to see that.
Yeah, and I think it'll spread a light on why we are where we are today. Mm-hmm. And, you know, how you get people saying, you guys aren't over it yet, and come on now, and we had a Black president, and like, nah, that didn't mean anything. Nothing. Mm-hmm. That, you know, it's just, I think I wrote it down here. I can't say it because it's cussing, but different day, no, same as different day, or something like that. I don't. Anyways, but it's helping people understand that the fight that we are having right now is the same fight, and that we get a little bit, and then we get a little bit, and we get a little bit, but it's not been true liberation. It's not fully equal. And as long as white supremacy is still in power, then these racist structures are going to continue, and we need to dismantle it. And so what is happening, what this book brings us, is a reminder of our past, that the past that we don't talk about, or rather we don't get in the history books, because I grew up learning this. My parents were not anti-racist, they were more Assimilationists, but I did get this information. So a lot of the names in the book I knew, a lot of the stories I already knew, but that I didn't get that from school. That was extra that my parents gave to me, and not everyone has that information. So, you know, we need to understand our past in order to understand our present and how to create a new future. And I think that's what this history book gives us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated about the reminder that people have always been fighting this rhetoric and these ideas is that it's not a new thing. It's not something that suddenly people are offended about. It's something that has been bothering the people affected the entire time these ideologies and these structures have existed. And the fact that it's you think it's new is not a problem with the idea. It's a problem with what you've been taught and how society has been set up, so that, you know, this curse theory thing that was in, you know, first came to light in the 1400s or 1500s, what, I can't remember the exact dates. The church I was raised in didn't give Black people, like, didn't abandon curse theory until 1978. So like that's not a long time ago. But like it's it's this old idea that's persisted, and you don't get over something that happened in 1978. You don't just magically get over something because, you know, you think that someone has reached the highest political office and so everything's fine. That's not how these things work. And it's a lot more baked into actual structures. And I really appreciated how Reynolds talked about that and how he broke it down, because those are big ideas and are complicated and can be very subtle and insidious. And I really liked how he broke that down for younger readers to say, hey, these are things to look out for. These are things to watch. And I think that was done really well.
And I like how he showed that language changed over time. So,
Yeah.
you know, like you brought up Law and Order and the use of thug and welfare queen, you know, those are racist dog whistles. And they seem, you know, that they're not offensive, but they are. And, you know, yes, they wouldn't have used welfare queen 100 years ago, but, you know, they use something else. And it's just, you know, we have to pay attention. We have to recognize those dog whistles and then, you know, fight back against them, you know. It also made me think, you know, in terms of, again, where we are right now, that Donald Trump and everything is a reaction to Barack Obama becoming president. So it's a racist reaction. It's the same thing that happened during Reconstruction, which he brought in, you know, just a little bit. But, you know, during Reconstructions, black males, because it wasn't women, black males had the right to vote. They also were able to hold office, but because the Southerners didn't like that, they reacted violently, and that was lost. And so that's exactly what's going on right now. You know, voting rights is, you know, that bill is still waiting to be passed. We've got voter suppression in progress in our face. You know, it's a reaction to try to push us back where we were. And that's a lot of understanding why people are protesting, fighting, and so hard this time, because we did make a lot of progress, and now there's an attempt to reverse it. But if we know our history, we're not going to let that happen. And that's why I think both books are very timely, but this one essentially because it's getting young kids fired up too, because you see more and more younger people involved. So it's very exciting.
Yes, and you brought up women. I definitely have noticed throughout my life a lack of women in history books, but again, this isn't a history book, so yay. There were more visible women within this text. Even if there were women in books that I've read about the past, in general, in school, it's usually been the same women. We've, you know, seen Rosa Parks, we've seen, you know, certain women talked about briefly, and then that's it. But this book still is lopsided in favor of men. There's still a lot of men here and not a whole lot of women, but we do get to hear about more women than typical. There's information about Phyllis Wheatley, Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, Audre Lorde, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and quite a few others, briefly. But the best part, I loved this part, there was a whole section of the book featuring Angela Davis. And, you know, I thought, am I just being really happy because I'm seeing some women? So was it enough? I don't know. But, you know, he did acknowledge Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality and was very definitely noting that Black women have been doing a lot of labor throughout the years without recognition. And so I did appreciate that, and I would still be hopeful that we would see a continuation of that trend. But that was something that I definitely appreciated.
Yeah, I like the part about Angela Davis too, you know, about her whole trajectory of her career and her life and everything, especially because she's still alive. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to talk to my students about it and be like, this person that he went in detail, you can look her up on Twitter. You know, like she was talking this summer, she's still alive, and, she's still fighting. And it brings, oh, so this wasn't that long ago. No, she's still alive. She's still out there fighting. And the fact that he brought in the women who created Black Lives Matter, so the kids know that it wasn't men that started this, it was women that started it. And just, I like how he brought in the Ida B. Wells challenge Du Bois and Washington. And I was like, yes, because she did. And, I really love that he did bring in that women were part of this fight, and that young girls can recognize they can be a part of this fight, that they have a voice they need to stand up to. I mean, I know a lot of them see it because we have a lot of phenomenal outspoken women right now, a lot of phenomenal outspoken women, but know that the women were there in history. I really, really appreciated that, really did.
Yeah, honestly, I think this book had a lot more women mentioned, than their accomplishments mentioned in it than my regular history book that I had in high school.
Yeah.
Like, there were just so many people that he that were brought up, that were talked about. Ida B. Wells and her lynching documentation, and Angela Davis. I didn't know a whole lot about Angela Davis because my school got to maybe World War II, maybe the start of civil rights, and then we ran out of time every year. So it was really neat to be able to see, hey, that there's this string of men and who are intellectuals and who have had the focus of the conversation. But there's also a long line of women who have done the same thing, who have done the same work, and who haven't had this same kind of recognition. And it's important that we, name them and focus on them and say they had thoughts and works that are just as important as the men, and that we ought to remember them as well.
Definitely.
And then with at least two of us being teachers, I can't help but bring up the aspect of what would we use this for in a classroom. So since I'm in elementary school level, I would probably be using this with mostly the teachers, quite honestly, because I think that every teacher needs to be reading this just to have the context for whatever they're teaching, but also with even the youngest, even with 4th and 5th graders, you could be using portions of the book. And there is a teacher's guide, so people don't have to just make everything up, that it offers some ideas. And since I work with the youngers, I typically use picture books, and there are actually tons of picture book biographies and nonfiction picture books, and even some of the historical fiction picture books that could be used to contrast. I was thinking that an easy one to do would be to get a picture book biography of Abraham Lincoln or Carl Linnaeus. He's the white supremacist who classified plants and animals for our classification system, but he also classified humans in a really racist way. So it'd be a good way to talk about the perspectives of the authors, reading critically, and how some people sanitize accounts, or they only address the positive aspects of somebody's life when they write biography. So there's so much that could be done there. But what were you thinking, K-Money, for middle or high school?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm actually teaching it. I'm gonna, if the schedule works out right, I'm gonna attempt to do the global read aloud this year. But oh gosh, as I was reading it, I was making notes as to what things I could do, aside, from listening to Jason read, of course, because he could do it far better than I could. But bringing in a lot of the primary sources from that time, so the kids can be exposed to the actual works of the people mentioned in the book. Like, actually read a poem by Phyllis Wheatley, I think, again, that would also break the, or not break the narrative of like Black people didn't write way back when, but, you know, he brings in the context. And then, you know, so we learn about this young woman who was tested for her intelligence, but look what she actually wrote, you know, so you can be like, oh, I'm looking at what she wrote. Definitely when we get to more modern age, like bring in speakings by Angela Davis. My principal's father was a freedom writer. Unfortunately, he's passed, but have her speak on him and show his, in her office is a picture of his arrest. So show pictures from, I made a note too, I think Bloody Sunday, and especially talk about John Lewis, who just passed. Bring in March. Bring in the writings of David Baldwin and Malcolm X. Maybe show a bit of the movie, because that was based heavily on, you know, Alex Haley's book. Bring in writers, art from the Harlem Renaissance. I have a poster from, I blinked on her name, but one of the visual artists from the Harlem Renaissance, and, you know, listen to the music of that period of time, so we can really get a sense of what people were doing, and it really brings it alive. And then my school is primarily Hispanic Latino, and so I also want to bring in the Chicano movement, how what Black folk were doing inspired the Chicano movement, and also talk about excuse me, like Japanese internment camp, you know, because those were racist things. It wasn't just whites being racist to Black, they were racist to everyone. And, you know, look at the Chinese Exclusion Act as well. So really just, let's take a different look on history and look at things that were happening that, you know, and, you know, these writers were talking about Black liberation, but their writings also affected other parts of history. So really get in and explore. And then I'm still designing the unit, but I also want the kids to explore, where are they? I hope none of my kids are segregationists. But I don't think they are, but I mean, who knows? It's, you know, but where are they? Are they becoming anti-racist, and, you know, help them grow to have anti-racist thought? Because I know within the Hispanic community, there's a lot of anti-Black bias, and we have had problems at our school because of it. So let's address that. And how do we fix it? How do we bring about change? And so I want the kids to examine that. But then what I have planned is, because we're a project-based school, so everything has to have some sort of project and learning and helping the community. And what I have planned, since we'll probably still be in distance learning then, is that they'll create Zoom panels and invite the 6th and 7th graders in to talk about the book, what they learned, etc. So we'll see if I pull that off. But I think there's so much you can do with this book. You can use it as a supplemental for history class. 8th graders have American history. Well, let's look at, you know, when America was founded. Okay, let's look at this book, the chapter that associates, you know, with that, you know. So there's so much you can do with this book that it's just, the ideas are endless, whatever you want to do.
I think your classroom ideas sound great. I'm not a teacher, so I'm just thinking back to my own junior high and high school years. And I think it would be really helpful, as you said, to do a supplemental thing. You know, this is what the promise of America was. This is how they were defining it, because it's not, they don't always match. Or like, I really appreciated the sections of the book that talked about the civil rights era and how different leaders came at, you know, civil rights with at different angles, or, you know, some were leaned more assimilationist versus anti-racist. And I really appreciated the discussion of W.E.B. Du Bois and how his thought changed over the course of his lifetime.
Yes.
Because I think too often when we have time to get to the civil rights era, we get Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, maybe Malcolm X, and then they were all the same and they all felt the same way, and now they're all safely in the past and we're done. And that's not what it was like, and that's not how the successors to that movement have, how things have changed. And so I think that kind of introduction of nuance would have been really helpful, especially because we've seen time and time again, especially in this book, that there are people who are actively fighting against these ideas of, these racist ideas, and, and how they don't always agree about how to do things. And, that discussion, I think, is a lot more helpful than the watered down, compressed versions that we typically get in school. And I also really appreciated the constant reminder that people come up with justifications for the terrible things they're doing. And and they keep going back to the well of terrible ideas and putting new wrapping around their awful the awful things they're doing to make themselves feel justified in their anti-Black stance. And so I think that kind of thing would have been helpful. Hey, the founders of of this country said X, and hey, it's popping up again a century later and a century later, and it's not something brand new. It's not some new way to say things. They're racist and they know it, and they're trying to get away with it, and people aren't going to let them.
Definitely. And I think one of my coworkers brought up in our meeting that with distance learning especially, we have the ability to zoom in, speakers and stuff. And so you have a lot of civil rights activists who are still alive, people who lived through it. My parents lived through it, and both are still alive. So, we can ask, teachers can reach out to some of these people and say, hey, would you be willing to come talk to my students about, your experiences or what have you? Or even people who, I don't want to say lived through Jim Crow, because the South, parts of the South still, we still have some downtowns, but, people's grandparents, experienced all that. George Takei is still alive, and he is very open to talking about his time in the internment camp. So being able to bring all these people who lived history and, have them come and speak, so it's real. It's not this thing that just happened and it's like theoretical. No, it's real. These people are real. You're looking at living history. So I think that'd be great for teachers, something to think about as you're reading this book and other books, is who can you bring in to talk that, can really bring it alive for the kids. Because I know when I was teaching in the spring and summer school, I brought in guest speakers. Nothing as deep as Stamped. They were just all fun stuff. But even still, the kids enjoyed it, hearing someone else besides me talk. So that's something to think about for teachers.
Yeah, it makes it way more memorable. And then while you were talking about primary sources, I was also thinking about what's local to here. You talked about sundown towns. I live in a sundown town. I mean, former, sort of. We are not without issues today. But I think that a lot of people don't know we were a sundown town and don't even know that phraseology. So if our kids' parents don't know that, obviously the kids wouldn't even know it. And there's a racist statue that is going to be removed within the next couple of weeks. And the process that happened to have that come about, looking at that and looking at what's going on in our community right now. In our, we've got a criminal justice committee that's dealing with stuff. And at the high school level, you could certainly look at some of that stuff or talk to some of the people on the committee. There's stuff going on right now that connects in our own spaces that could, inspire the kids to do stuff locally right now. They would have actual action that they could take if it was something that concerned them. So I think getting to what's going on here is another thing. What's right here, right now? Who's being affected right now by the things we have in place here? So that's depending on how comfortable you feel with navigating that with students. I mean, I think that would be an amazing way to go, giving the kids something that they could care about today, where they are.
Definitely. And I know we talked about this earlier, that this would be good for teachers to read, because we need to unpack our own. As I was reading this, granted, my parents did teach me, all the stories and what have you, but very assimilationist in thought and philosophy. Hence why, go make sure you go to school and go to college and, do all this kind of stuff. And it's not that it's a bad thing, but that was the school of thought. And, like Audrey said, people can change. And, once we have more information, people can change. So I think teachers also need to unpack where they are, because we've had the same education that is missing a lot. And so we need to figure it out for ourselves, because we can't really expect our students to fully grasp this if we don't fully grasp it ourselves. So I'd highly recommend whole schools. I'm going to recommend my whole school do it. We'll see what happens. Right now it's just like, let's just get through distance learning one thing at a time.
I know. Oh, and I don't want this to get lost in the fact that we're having to look at so many new ways of doing things because of our health situation. There's momentum right now around anti-racist work, and I know that it would be really easy to say, well, we don't have time or resources to deal with that right now. But while there's momentum, we really need to do something with it. And so we can't just, well, yeah, there's coronavirus, it's a big deal. But coronavirus is also contributing, to the issues we already have. It's exacerbating everything. So yeah, that's been something that's been, I have to keep bringing this up and keep, advocating for our teachers to read this and things like that, even though they're like, but corona. Yes. But
yeah. And since we're reinventing school, might as well look at how do we reinvent how we teach, our approaches to teaching, just reinventing education in the first place. This is a perfect opportunity. Unfortunately, I wish we had the leadership to do that, but vote.
Vote, yes. Vote. Yeah. Well, and do y'all have anything else to add? I think I'm out of questions, but anything else for the good? It's been really great talking to y'all about this.
Yes, it has. This has been fun. I'm really glad we did this.
Yeah, I am too. Well, since no one has any other comments, viewers, why don't you let us know what you thought of stamps down in the questions below or comments below. Otherwise, have a great week, everyone. Bye.